But I want to dive right in and talk about how using the right words is so important. Really, something that we've been promoting for the last week about this Blabbit episode, which is the power of conversation, the power of conversational coaching. And will, of course, lead to coaching leadership where everything goes from there. So that's my long-winded question, Tim. And that is, what do you think about that?
Yeah, I think it's, when you think about leadership, for decades, leaders have been taught to lead by example, have people follow them. And it really led to more of a telling type of interaction. And fundamentally, that we've talked about that in coaching for 20 years. Because of the pandemic, now it's become even really more important. We have to ask questions. We have to listen. We have to understand our people. And so when I use a phrase such as, Paul, what you need to do is much different than, well, what if we got together and then you fill in the blank? And so we teach some core language skills using words like we're in it together. Share, it's a friendly way to disseminate information or feedback. The word opportunity versus constructive feedback. People often say they don't have time to coach. That's really a mask for I don't know what to do and I don't know what to say. Once they do know what to do and say, it requires practice. Most people don't practice conversational skills.
And don't you find it's really kind of one of the things that, like you said, you have to practice? And when people say they don't practice, I keep coming back to the fact that Michael Jordan still practiced free throws before and after every practice, just for basketball. It's really a big difference between speaking with somebody and talking to somebody.
Yeah. And it's a different, and I love the way Paul had introduced, and I love what you had just shared, is it's a different way to engage with people. And I always go back to the fundamental of, you just said something, Glenn, that was important, is talking at people. Is I always ask people, when you're talking to somebody and you're listening, are you thinking about what you want to say while they're talking? So if you are, and we're all guilty of that, don't tell me you're actively listening, because you're not. Active listening is the ability to paraphrase back to somebody, state what they've heard. And then ultimately that builds trust, versus me saying, oh, so Glenn, you had mentioned that, John Stockton shooting free throws. I just demonstrated I wasn't listening to you, which happened what? I just broke trust. And I think that leaders are now starting to get that more than ever, is because of the pandemic, is how people are feeling, their empathy, their well-being, their mental health, their stress. That's really been front and center. Oh, by the way, now we're coming out of this pandemic. We need people to work. So now how do we change our dialogue to that? And all of that requires language and our ability to converse and coach.
I could see there being a little bit of pushback in terms of, well, I want to make sure that the person who's listening to me understands the importance of what it is that I'm saying. So there is a balance there. And if I'm hearing you correctly, hopefully I am, then what you're saying is that people can be persuaded, but the language sometimes can seem like it's coercion, like you're trying to bludgeon them with your opinion, rather than having them believe that this is a journey that you're going on with them.
Sure. You can have people who are very dictative. You can have people who lead with opinion. We actually encourage people, if you find yourself to be that type of person, that doesn't mean you've lost the opportunity of coaching. So if I say, Paul, here's something that I really think that you ought to buy into, or something you ought to do, instead of just letting it sit there and assume I've motivated you or I have agreement, I might ask a clarifying question such as, hearing that, Paul, what goes through your mind? And, where do you think you are in the scale in terms of agreement or disagreement with me? So you can lead with that and then use language of clarification to actually start a coaching conversation. So often in our business, we have, I will say, strong-willed male testosterone men who say it's my way or the highway. And they'll say, I'm very directive. I'm a hard charging guy. How do I do this? I tell people, don't lose that way, yet you can couple coaching and language to support the conversation. It doesn't just have to end on what comes out of your mouth. You can lead into a conversation.
Well, and for that type of person, don't you think it's some skills that need to be developed so that every time they're having a meeting with their team, every time they're doing it, it's not that same go, 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 rah, rah. It's having some times when you do pull in and get feedback, and time. There's sometimes to lead, and there's sometimes to be the leader to allow others to lead with you.
Absolutely. And I go back to, often we have a one-way direction when we coach or when we communicate with people. So if I say, Glenn, we've got to do a presentation next week, what's a word that would describe how you're feeling? And you say terrified, nervous, I'm on pins and needles. And Paul goes, oh, I love this stuff. I would coach you differently. Yet often leaders will have that one-way street saying, well, be confident. Don't let it bother you. And we give these rhetorical mandates over the wall.
What do you say to individuals who want to see this important change? But what are some of the baby steps to getting there, to not seeming like, I'm sorry, Bob, you're not acting like yourself.
Right.
What happens then?
So I'll go back to the earlier part of your statement. I think that we also have to look at, managers and leaders coach every day. You're coaching people to stay or leave. Nobody goes home and your spouse says, honey, how was your day? Nobody says neutral. I didn't have a feeling from 8 to 5. Most people have good days or bad days. What's the number one reason why people quit? Their boss. So I always tell leaders, if you don't have time to coach, remember silence is very loud. So if you're not talking to me as a leader, guess what I'm thinking? Oh man, my boss loves me. No. How come he never talks to me? How come she never brings me in? How come I never get positive feedback? So the baby steps, we do not take clients unless there is a cultural commitment. I'll work with individuals. Then the individuals are in a very precarious position depending on their political waters. So if you're coaching and the number one thing, baby step you can do is call someone to the office for the good stuff.